Trezaki Show. I'm the Trev. It's too sweet. Anyway, continuing with retired numbers. And today, we're talking about the third number retired by the Boston Bruins. 3 down, 9 to go. But we're talking today about really one of the cornerstones of the Bruins' early success. And when I mean early, I mean before probably even your lifetime. Definitely before mine. But I'm talking early. But this is literally a player who he was so versatile, you could put him in any position, whether it was wing, defense, even coach. It didn't matter. He could literally do any position you put him in. So, with that being said, we're going to talk about the number 5, which was worn by Dit Clapper. So let's talk about it. Alright, so Dit Clapper's 20-year career with the Boston Bruins began on October 25th, 1927, when the Bruins bought Clapper's contract from the Boston Tigers of the Can-Am League. Now, Clapper would make an immediate splash, scoring his first NHL goal 10 seconds into his first NHL shift. That happened on November 15th, 1927, in a 1-1 tie versus the Chicago Blackhawks. Not a bad way to make the mark at all. Now, Clapper would finish his rookie year with 18 points in 42 games played, as the Bruins would advance to the playoffs as the American Division champions. Now, unfortunately for the Bruins, though, they would lose to the eventual Stanley Cup champs, that being the New York Rangers, in the semifinals, with Clapper going pointless in 2 games. But all told, that's not a bad first season at all. The 1928-29 season was the Clapper placed on a line with Cooney Weiland and Dutch Gaynor, which would get nicknamed the Dynamite line later in time. But on that line, the Bruins put together an unbelievable 13-game unbeaten streak, which not only put them back in contention for a playoff spot, it also helped them clinch their second American Division championship. Now, Clapper would be also experimented with on defense during the season, on top of, playing the right wing, sometimes playing both positions in one night. Something that nowadays is not all uncommon, as you see a lot of players playing forward and defense. Now, Clapper would contribute 11 points in 40 games, and the Bruins would get that first round quarterfinal bye that was always so vital back in the early playoff structure, before taking out the Montreal Canadiens in 3 games in the semifinals on their way to the first Stanley Cup finals in franchise history. Now there, they'd meet their division rivals and the team that knocked them out of the playoffs the season prior to win the Stanley Cup of their own, the New York Rangers, where they would take care of those Rangers in 2 games, outscoring them 4-1 to win their first Stanley Cup championship, in franchise history, with Clapper adding 1 goal in 5 playoff games played. 2 years, immediate result. Not bad at all. Now, thanks to a lot of rule changes for the 29-30 season, not just the Bruins, but the NHL themselves would see an explosion of offense. The Dynamite line would be no different, especially for Clapper as well. Sure, the line combined for 183 points between the 3 of them, with 61 of those being a career high for Clapper, which also included a career high 41 goals, which also included his first of 6 career hat tricks, which happened on Christmas 1930. Now, those 61 points would be good enough for him to be placed 3rd in league scoring. Now, a lot of the offense was essentially because the offside rule was written out of the rules. And of course, that would only last so long, as most good things too, as that would be written back in mid-season. But with such high offense, the Bruins were essentially a no-doubter to repeat as the American Division champs. As a matter of fact, they had the division won by 30 points. So they were no-doubters all the way through. Naturally, the Bruins got that quarterfinal bye, and then took out the Montreal Maroons in 4 games on their way to their Stanley Cup defense. Now, however, the high scoring didn't really seem to help them soon enough, as the Montreal Canadiens would beat the Bruins in 2 games for the Stanley Cup. You win some, you lose some, right? Can't win them all. Insert cliche here. Clapper would add a career high 4 playoff goals in 6 playoff games. Now, the 1930-31 season would see the Bruins offense not nearly up to the same numbers as it was the season before. Obviously, with the offside rule being written back in, that changes a lot of things. But that didn't stop the Bruins from winning their 4th American Division championship, with Clapper adding 30 points in 43 games played. Now, again, as American Division champs, the Bruins got that quarterfinal bye, but the bye didn't seem to really make much of a difference, as the Montreal Canadiens once again stood in their way, eliminating the Bruins in 5 games en route to their 2nd Stanley Cup in a row. Now, Clapper would add 6 points in those 5 games. But following the regular season, and this is a first, Clapper would be one of the first players named to the NHL's first ever 2nd NHL All-Star team. So, not bad to have your name associated with a first, especially when it comes to being nominated to the All-Star team. But alas, all good things have to come to an end, and the 31-32 season would be less than a success for the Boston Bruins, as they would finish last in the American Division. With a positive coming from this, if you want to put one in, is Clapper would lead the team in assists with 22 and points with 39. So that's never a bad thing. But this would also be a season where the Dynamite line went through a bit of a shift, as Marty Berry would end up replacing Dutch Gaynor on that line. The 1932-33 season, that would see Clapper named team captain for the first time in his career. But as was tradition with the Boston Bruins at that time, he was only captain for the year. The Bruins did, however, manage to get back to their winning ways, winning the Adams American Division for the 5th time in franchise history, which was so close that the Bruins won it on a tiebreaker with 13 more goals for. That's how close it was back then. Clapper would add 28 points in 48 games, and as per usual, the Bruins would get that quarterfinal bye, but would get absolutely heartbroken in a 6 overtime Game 5 semifinals loss against the Stanley Cup finalists in the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, Clapper would only had 2 points in those 5 games. Again, it's like repeat here. The 33-34 season would see the Bruins regress yet again, finishing last in the American Division for the 2nd time in 3 years, with Clapper only contributing 22 points in 48 games. But as they have done before, the 1934-35 season would be a much better season for the Bruins, winning their 6th American Division championship, with Clapper adding 38 points in 48 games. Now, the Bruins would again get that first round bye, but unfortunately they'd be facing the Toronto Maple Leafs in the semifinals, and despite Clapper winning Game 1 all by himself, seeing him score the only goal in a double overtime Game 1 win, the Maple Leafs would limit the Bruins to only 1 goal in the next 3 games, advancing to the Stanley Cup Finals, with that double overtime Game 1 goal being the only point Clapper would score in those 3 games. Now, Clapper would be nominated to the NHL's 2nd All-Star team again for the 2nd time in his career following this regular season. And while the 1935-36 season would see the Bruins fall short of another American Division championship, they did still advance to the playoffs. So it's not the usual make it, don't make it, make it, don't make it. They're actually putting together solid consistency at this point, finishing 2nd in the division, with Clapper adding 25 points in 44 games. Now, in the quarterfinals, the Bruins would again meet the Toronto Maple Leafs, losing a 2-game series by a total goal eventual to the Stanley Cup finalists, with Clapper only adding 1 assist. The 1936-37 season would pretty much be a carbon copy season for the Bruins, as they would again finish 2nd in the American Division, with Clapper adding 25 points in 48 games. Now, in the quarterfinals, the Bruins would play the Montreal Maroons, so it's not the Canadiens, and would be outscored 12-3 in 3 games, with Clapper scoring both those goals in those 3 games. So you'll say they weren't going very far past that. The 1937-38 season would be a season of change for the Bruins. Not content with just making the playoffs to minimal success since winning their cup last, the decision was made for Clapper to return to playing defense. And team up on a defensive pair with Eddie Shore, we talked about here, can never be a bad thing. Now, in terms of regular season success, well, I mean, the only place to go from second place is first, right? And the Bruins did just that, finishing to win the American Division once again, with Clapper adding 15 points in 46 games. And again, the Bruins would get that first round bye. And again, they would meet the Toronto Maple Leafs in the semifinals. And that in a very close 3-game series, which had 3 overtime periods amongst them. The Bruins would fall to the eventual Stanley Cup finalists, with Clapper going pointless. Ouch. The 1938-39 season, however, allowed to see the fruits of change pay off. With the NHL now a 7-team league, there was no need for division, so you didn't have to worry about finishing first in the American or anything like that. Instead, you just had to worry about finishing first in the league, which the Bruins did manage to do, holding a 16-point lead over the second-place New York Rangers, with Clapper adding 26 points in 42 games. And again, the Bruins would get that first-round bye. The first-round bye was a big deal. Before eliminating the same Rangers in 7 games, which also included 8 overtime periods in 4 games. On their way back to the Stanley Cup Finals, their first time in 9 years. Now, the finals, they would meet their playoff nemesis from the last few years in the Toronto Maple Leafs, and would ultimately make winning the Stanley Cup look very easy, as the Bruins win their second cup in 5 games, with Clapper adding 1 assist in 12 playoff games. Now, to cap off this season, Clapper would be named to the NHL's first NHL All-Star team for the first time in his career. So, not a bad deal. The 1939-40 season would see Clapper named team captain for a second time in his career. Now, he would hold this position for 5 years. But the theme of the Bruins season was to repeat the success of the 1938-39 season. And the Bruins would replicate a portion of this, once again finishing first in the league, with Clapper adding 28 points in 44 games. And once again, the Bruins get that first round bye. I know I talk about that first round bye, but it means a big deal in the grand scheme of things. You're either playing more games or less games. But they would meet the New York Rangers in the semifinals. And all would have went to plan, I'm sure, if the Bruins weren't shut out in 3 of the 6 games played to the eventual Stanley Cup champs, with Clapper getting 2 assists in those 6 games. Now, despite not being able to repeat as Stanley Cup champs, Clapper would be named to the NHL's first All-Star team for a second straight year. So, that's not bad. The 1940-41 season would hopefully be a better year than the last season was, and it kind of really played out that way, with the Bruins finishing first in the NHL for a 3rd straight year, with Clapper adding 26 points in 48 games. Now, after receiving that first round bye, the Bruins would meet the Toronto Maple Leafs in the semifinals, eliminating them in a very, very close 7 games on the way to the Stanley Cup Finals for the second time in 3 years. Now, there, they'd meet the Detroit Red Wings. And they really managed to make this one look super easy, eliminating the Red Wings in a 4-game sweep to win the team's 3rd Stanley Cup in franchise history, with Clapper adding a career high in 5 assists in 11 games played. And to top all that, Clapper would be named to the NHL's first All-Star team for a 3rd consecutive year. And this Cup win would also make Clapper the first, and to this date, as of this recording, only Boston Bruin to win 3 Stanley Cups with the team. Yeah, Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito, they only won it twice. Clapper won it 3 times. Now again, the 1941-42 season, the theme of the season is defense. Defend that Stanley Cup, right? Now we'd see a bit of a digression, with the Bruins managing to finish 3rd in the NHL, but still managing to make the playoffs, so it's not a bad digression, it's just a small digression. But for Clapper, this wouldn't be the best season, as an injury would shorten his season to only 32 games, where he added 15 points. But it was that same injury that would keep Clapper from participating in the playoffs. That stings. The 1942-43 season would see the Bruins manage to get back up, higher than 3rd place anyways, managing to finish 2nd in the league, with Clapper managing 23 points in 38 games. Now, in the playoffs, the Bruins would easily eliminate the Montreal Canadiens in 5 games, which included 3 games going over to overtime, on the way to the Stanley Cup for the 3rd time in 5 years. Now, in the finals, it would be essentially a rematch of the 1941 Stanley Cup Finals, with the Bruins facing the Detroit Red Wings. And much like the 1941 Finals, this too would be a 4-game sweep for the Detroit Red Wings, who managed to keep the Bruins to 5 goals in the first 2 games and none in the last 2 games. So, yeah, Clapper would have 4 points in 9 playoff games. Now, if they were managed to actually score something in those last 2 games, do you think that would have made a difference? I don't know. Detroit was a solid team back then. The 1943-44 season would see Clapper transition into a new role onto the team. Now, head coach at this time, Art Ross, he ended up getting ill during the season. So Clapper would transition into a player/coach kind of role. The only player in team history to be a player coach. Initially, this was to be an interim thing, temporary, not for long. But unfortunately for the Bruins, this wouldn't improve their results at all during the season, as the Bruins would fail to make the playoffs for the first time in 10 years. Damn. Clapper would add 31 points in 50 games, including a career high 25 assists. And during the season, Clapper would also break the all-time games played record. Now, obviously, this has been broken a few times. But to cap off the season, Clapper would also be named to the NHL's second NHL All-Star team for the 3rd time in his career. The 1944-45 season would see Clapper hand off his captaincy to Bill Cowley, as well as see Art Ross retire from the bench entirely, instead sticking to a more GM kind of role, thus making Clapper a full-time player coach. And after a year away from the playoffs, the Bruins would manage to find their way back, barely, finishing 4th in the standings, with Clapper adding 23 points in 46 games, including his last NHL hat trick on January 21st, 1945, against the New York Rangers. They seem to be all over this video. In the playoffs, the Bruins would meet the Detroit Red Wings, and even though this was a close 7-game series, the Bruins just could not get past the Stanley Cup finalists, with Clapper going pointless in those 7 games. I did say earlier, Detroit was a monster team back in the 40s. The 1945-46 season was supposed to be Clapper's last season, as he intended to be a full-time coach after the season. And for it, the Bruins did much better in the standings, finishing 2nd in the NHL, with Clapper adding 5 assists in 30 games. Now, in the playoffs, the Bruins would avenge their playoff loss from the prior season, eliminating the Detroit Red Wings in 5 games, on their way back to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time in 3 years. This guy has Stanley Cup Finals written all over him. Now, in the finals, the Bruins would meet the Montreal Canadiens. And offensively, despite lasting 5 games, the Bruins would keep the scores close. But they just could not get past the Montreal Canadiens, who would win the Stanley Cup, with Clapper again going pointless in 4 games. Now, while the 1945-46 season was supposed to be Clapper's last season, the 46-47 season ended up being officially Clapper's last season as a player, only really stepping in when Jack Crawford got injured. So the time on the team was, as far as player is concerned, not a lot. He only played 6 games that season, but in his last game played, the Bruins made it a memorable one, defeating the New York Rangers 10-1. Now, Clapper would only play those 6 games and scored no points. It's the only time he ever scored no points in the regular season. But back to that last game, February 12th, 1947 to be exact. Clapper would announce his retirement as a player, concentrating full-time on being a coach. And I guess just as a token of honor and approval from the team, His number was retired that same night. So that's what 20 years ago would have got you in Boston at the time. But that is essentially the story of the number 5 and Dit Clapper with the Boston Bruins. So let's talk some numbers. Alright, so in 835 games played, Clapper would score 229 goals, 248 assists for 477 points. Now if we're talking playoffs, that's 82 games played with 13 goals, 16 assists, and 29 points. Now, he is a 3-time NHL first-team All-Star, being nominated in 1939, 1940, and 1941, as well as a 3-time NHL second All-Star team, being nominated in 1931, 1935, and 1944. Let's also not forget, he's a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, when the Bruins won it in 1929, 1939, and 1941, and as mentioned earlier in the video, the most for any Bruins player in the history of the Boston Bruins. Most guys were lucky if they have 2, some guys have 1. Clapper has 3. The first player in NHL history to play 20 seasons, and to date, as of this recording, one of 9 players to do so with the same team. Now, at the time of his retirement, he was the leader in games played and seasons played. Again, both records have been broken. He was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1947, the first player to have that mandatory 3-year period waived for immediate entry into the Hockey Hall of Fame. He's also the first living person inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1947, as that was the year it had opened. And his number was retired, as mentioned, on February 12th, 1947, the same day he retired. So nobody has worn it since. Nobody wore it before, nobody's worn it since, as the way it should be. So, if you can permit me, here's what I can put together as an opinion for the guy. The hardest part of trying to formulate an opinion of a guy you haven't watched, as I said, before my time, probably before yours, is it's a hard thing to do. You have to rely on basically source material, and really it's not that hard. You connect all the dots, as if you've listened to this. A valuable commodity, no matter what position you put him in, whether it was defense, whether it was on right wing, whether it was the coach. It was results all the way. On the wing, he could score and he could make the play. On the defense, he could keep the opposition at bay. And at coach, well, he did manage to keep the Bruins competitive as a player coach. He did stick around as coach for a little while after that. Now, if the Bruins were a house, this is the best comparison I can give you. If the Bruins were a house, he's undoubtedly the foundation. His dedication to the team was unmatched, and the fact that he could say he's the only Bruin in team history with 3 cups to his name with the team, that's always a gooder. You can't take that away, no matter what. One of the best in the Bruins' early history. So that's another one of them Trev hockey shows. I want to thank you for tuning in. Don't think I don't appreciate the gesture, especially if you've made it this far. And if you have made it this far, I think you got to consider giving me that thumbs up. I mean, just to let me know you've made it this far. If you're just digging what I'm doing, if you just want to say hey, that thumbs up goes a long way. So let's make it count. That red button that says subscribe all over it, come on, you know you want to. I know you want to. The algorithm knows you want to. So it'll make you feel good. It'll make me feel good. Let's hit that red button. We're pushing for 500. Hopefully by the end of the year. So let's see if we can make that happen. To everybody that has jumped on board, just know I do appreciate you very, very much. And I'm glad you're coming along for the ride. If you want, that link in the description below, that'll take you to my Facebook page. Feel free to join that. It's free. And I'd love to build an audience. I mean, it's growing, so I can always be content with that. So moving forward, as far as retired numbers goes, like I said, I'm about to come into Giants, but that's at least 1 or 2 more retired numbers away. But either way, in the meantime, and in between time, be looking for Trev. Later.